Life has a peculiar way of testing us when the stakes are highest. On a rain-drenched morning in downtown Seattle, Mark Sullivan's entire future hinged on a job interview he'd spent weeks preparing for. His bank account was running dry, and his young daughter's future weighed heavily on his shoulders. But fate had other plans. There, on the flooded highway, a stranded luxury sedan caught his eye. The choice seemed impossible. Drive past and make his interview, or stop to help a stranger in need. What he didn't know was that this moment would change everything. The woman whose car he rescued wasn't just another stranded motorist. She was Sarah Blackwood, CEO of the very company he was rushing to interview for. Could a missed interview actually be the best thing that ever happened to him? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The alarm chirped at 5:30 a.m., but Mark Sullivan had been awake since 4, rehearsing answers to interview questions in his head. The mirror reflected a face lined with determination as he worked the silk tie around his collar, his fingers remembering the motions Claire had taught him years ago. Loop, swoop, and pull through, he whispered, hearing her voice in his memory. The knot wasn't perfect. Claire would have adjusted it with that gentle smile of hers, but it would have to do. Down the hall, soft rustling sounds signaled Emily was already awake. At 8 years old, she had an uncanny sense for important days. Mark found her at her small desk, colored pencils scattered across its surface, tongue caught between her teeth in concentration. "Morning, sweetheart," he said, pausing in the doorway. "You're up early." Emily looked up, her face brightening. "I'm making something for your office, Daddy." She quickly covered the drawing with her arms, but not before Mark caught a glimpse of stick figures and what looked like a very important desk. "My office?" He kept his voice steady, though his heart clenched. "That's thinking ahead." "You're going to get it," Emily declared, with the absolute certainty only children possess. "I asked the stars last night, just like Mommy taught me." Mark crossed the room and kissed the top of her head, breathing in the lingering scent of strawberry shampoo. "Then I better not disappoint the stars. How about some breakfast while your masterpiece dries?" In the kitchen, Mark moved with practiced efficiency, cracking eggs one-handed while toasting bread. The routine was worn smooth by months of morning duets, him preparing breakfast while Emily chatted about everything and nothing. Today, though, her conversation circled back to one theme. "Will you have a big window in your new office?" She perched on her usual stool, watching him work. "Bobby's dad has a window where he can see the whole city." "We'll see, honey." Mark slid a perfectly folded omelette onto her favorite plate, the one with dancing penguins around the rim. "First, I have to ace this interview." "What does ace mean?" "It means to do really, really well." He sat beside her with his own plate, though his stomach was too knotted to eat. "Like your spelling tests." Emily nodded sagely, cutting her omelette into precise squares. "You'll ace it, Daddy. You're the best at everything." The faith in her voice made his throat tight. If only the job market shared his daughter's confidence. 6 months of rejections had taught him otherwise, but he wouldn't burden her with that reality. Instead, he watched her eat, memorizing the way morning light caught her hair, so like Claire's, and the small furrow of concentration between her brows as she carefully speared each bite. After breakfast, Emily disappeared to her room and returned triumphant, clutching her drawing. "It's dry now, you can look." Mark accepted the paper with appropriate ceremony. The scene showed a stick figure behind an impressive brown rectangle, the important desk he'd glimpsed earlier. Through a large blue square window, crayon skyscrapers reached towards smiling yellow stars, but it was the smaller figure beside. The desk that caught his eye, a little girl with red curls, holding the stick hand of the larger figure. "See?" Emily pointed. "That's your new office, and that's me visiting you. And look." Her finger moved to the stars visible through the crayon window. "They're all smiling because they know you're going to get the job." Mark carefully folded the drawing and tucked it into his jacket pocket, right over his heart. Perfect place for it, he said, and meant it. Ready for school? The drive to Emily's school was their special time, filled with their usual car games, and Emily's running commentary on the gathering rain clouds. As he pulled up to the drop-off zone, she unfastened her seatbelt but paused before opening the door. "Daddy?" "Yes, sweetheart. Remember what Mommy always said about rainy days?" Mark's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "That they're just the stars' way of watering their garden." Emily nodded. "So all this rain means the stars are really taking care of your interview." She leaned across the console to hug him, then was gone in a flash of red hair and yellow raincoat, joining the stream of children heading into the school. Mark watched until she disappeared through the doors, her drawing a tangible weight against his chest. "Taking care of things," he murmured, adjusting his tie one last time. He hoped Claire's stars were listening. He couldn't bear to see disappointment replace the certainty in Emily's eyes. Not again. The newspaper clipping was still there, folded in his wallet behind a faded photo of Claire. Mark had kept it as a reminder, though he could recite the headline from memory. "Tech giant Axion announces major restructuring, 3,000 jobs cut." His name wasn't mentioned, of course. He was just one of the thousands, a statistic in black and white. 6 months ago, he'd sat in the glass-walled conference room, listening to corporate phrases that all meant the same thing. "Your position has been eliminated." 14 years of loyalty, of missed weekends and late nights, reduced to a severance package and a cardboard box of desk items. The drive home that day had been the longest of his life. Longer even than the night he'd lost Claire, because this time he had to be the bearer of bad news to Emily. She'd been working on her homework at the kitchen table, pink eraser shavings scattered around her math worksheet. "You're home early!" she'd exclaimed, then caught the look on his face. Even at 8, she could read him like a book. "Daddy, what's wrong?" He'd tried to explain it in terms she could understand, that sometimes companies had to make hard decisions, that it wasn't about him personally, that they would be okay. She'd listened with Claire's serious expression, asking questions that cut to the heart of things with a child's devastating simplicity. "But you're the best at your job. Mrs. Rodriguez says you're a computer wizard. She told me when you fixed the school's website. Sometimes being good at your job isn't enough." "Sweetheart, that's not fair." "No," he'd agreed, "it's not." The next morning, he'd found her stuffing her piggy bank into her backpack. When he asked why, she explained she was taking it to school to count it properly. The math center had better calculators, "so we can know exactly how much we have," she'd said, as if her saved allowance could replace his salary. He'd knelt down and hugged her tight, his brilliant, beautiful girl who was so much like her mother, it hurt sometimes. "Keep your savings, Em. Dad's got this covered." But as weeks turned into months, that confidence had worn thin. His savings, carefully built over years, dwindled at an alarming rate. The Seattle tech sector, once booming, had turned cautious. His former colleagues, scattered to the winds by the layoffs, posted about their own struggles finding work. Some left the industry entirely. Others moved away, chasing opportunities in different cities. Mark had considered it, pulling up stakes, moving somewhere with a lower cost of living. But Seattle was Emily's home, her school, her friends, the parks where Claire had pushed her on swings, the ice cream shop where they still went every Sunday. How could he take her away from everything familiar, everything that kept Claire's memory alive? So he'd stayed, adapting his strategy. He took freelance work when he could find it, stretched his severance package with careful budgeting, and kept applying. His resume evolved through countless revisions. Each rejection email taught him something new about the current job market, about what companies were looking for. The worst part wasn't the rejections. It was maintaining a brave face for Emily. She never lost faith. Not even when he had to cancel her summer camp registration or explain why they were having more pasta dinners than usual. Each morning, she'd ask if today was the day he'd find his new job. Each evening, she'd listen to his carefully edited updates about promising leads and upcoming interviews. Late at night, after she was asleep, He'd sit at the kitchen table with his laptop, scanning job boards and company websites. That's how he'd found the Blackwood Innovations posting. The position seemed tailor-made for his skills, senior systems architect, with a focus on educational technology platforms. The company had a reputation for innovation, yes, but also for their commitment to social impact. They developed software solutions for schools, libraries, and educational non-profits. The research he'd done only increased his interest. Employee reviews spoke of a positive culture, good work-life balance, and meaningful projects. The salary range would let him rebuild their savings, maybe even start a college fund for Emily. But it was the company's mission statement that really caught his attention. Technology should open doors, not build walls. He'd spent weeks preparing for this interview. Practice sessions in front of the mirror, mock interviews with former colleagues, deep dives into the company's technical stack and project history. Emily had been his most enthusiastic practice and partner, sitting in her interview chair with Claire's old reading glasses perched on her nose, asking questions from a list she'd written herself. "What makes you special?" she'd asked one evening, frowning at her paper. "I think you mean, what makes you uniquely qualified for this position?" he'd gently corrected. "No," she'd shaken her head. "I mean special. Mrs. Blackwood should know you're special." Now, driving through the strengthening rain, Mark touched the folded drawing in his pocket. The weight of these past 6 months pressed down on him, but so did Emily's unshakable faith. Somewhere up there, in the rain-dark sky, Claire's stars were indeed watering their garden. He just hoped they had something more than rejections ready to bloom. The job posting printout was thick with highlighter marks and margin notes, each color representing a different category. Yellow for technical requirements, green for soft skills, blue for company culture points. Mark had studied it so many times, he'd had to reprint it twice, the paper wearing thin at the folds. Senior Systems Architect, Blackwood Innovations position, overview, leading development of next-generation educational technology platforms. He'd found it at 2 a.m. during one of his late-night job search sessions. The posting had gone live just hours before, and something about it had made him sit up straighter in his chair, the fatigue of endless applications falling away. It wasn't just the technical requirements that matched his experience almost perfectly. It was the way the posting was written, emphasizing collaboration, creativity, and social impact. The company's portfolio included projects he'd admired from afar, a revolutionary learning management system that adapted to different learning styles, virtual laboratory simulations for schools that couldn't afford expensive equipment, language learning platforms that preserved endangered indigenous languages, real solutions for real problems. Mark had spent that entire night researching, his kitchen table gradually disappearing under printed articles and scribbled notes. Blackwood Innovations had started small, just Sarah Blackwood and 3 developers working out of a converted warehouse. 10 years later, they were leading the educational technology sector, but had maintained their founding principle. Technology should serve humanity, not the other way around. The next morning, Emily had found him asleep at the table, his coffee long cold beside him. She'd shaken him awake, worried. "Daddy, did you forget to go to bed?" "No, sweetheart." He'd straightened up, his neck protesting. "I was just doing some very important homework." She'd examined his notes with serious interest. "Is this for your new job?" "Maybe. It's a really special company. They make computer programs that help kids learn better." Emily's eyes had lit up. "Like my math games at school?" "Exactly like that. Even better, actually. They make all sorts of things to help teachers teach and students learn. Then you have to work there," she'd declared. "You're the best at helping me learn things. Remember when you made that story about the princess who learned multiplication?" He did remember. It had been during the first rocky months after Claire's passing, when Emily had struggled with her times tables. He'd created a simple game where a princess had to multiply her resources to feed her growing dragon army. Emily had mastered multiplication within weeks, and her teacher had asked for a copy of the game to use with other students. That memory had shaped his application strategy. Instead of just submitting a standard resume, he'd included a portfolio of small educational tools he'd developed over the years, most created for Emily, others for friends' children or local schools. Programs that made learning feel like play, that adapted to each child's pace and style. The interview preparation had been equally thorough. He'd set up a dedicated notebook in Evernote, organizing it into sections: company, history and culture, technical stack and architecture, current projects and challenges, industry trends and innovations, potential questions and answers. He'd even created flowcharts of their current educational platforms, analyzing potential improvements and expansion opportunities. Every evening, after Emily was in bed, he'd run through practice interviews, recording himself to analyze his responses. Was he speaking too quickly? Did he maintain good eye contact? Was he effectively communicating both his technical expertise and his passion for educational technology? His former team lead from Axion, Dave, had done a mock interview over video chat, playing the role of a tough technical interviewer. "You're more than ready," Dave had said afterward. "Just remember to breathe, and maybe mention that adaptive learning algorithm you developed for the science curriculum at Emily's school. That's exactly the kind of thinking they're looking for." The morning of the interview, Mark had reviewed his notes one final time over breakfast, adding a few last-minute thoughts in the margins of the job posting. Emergency contact numbers for the daycare that would watch Emily if the interview ran late. The best route to the Blackwood offices, accounting for typical morning traffic. A backup route in case of delays. Everything was planned, every detail considered. He'd even laid out his suit the night before. The charcoal grey one Claire had helped him pick out years ago, saying the colour brought out his eyes. The shirt was crisp, the tie selected to convey professionalism without being stuffy. His shoes, polished to a mirror shine. This wasn't just another interview. This was the opportunity he'd been waiting for, a chance to combine his technical skills with his passion for education. A way to make Emily proud, to show her that persistence and preparation paid off, a potential new chapter in their lives. If only the rain would let up a little. Mark's phone buzzed just as he merged onto I-5. The automated alert flashed across his screen. Severe weather warning, heavy rainfall expected throughout morning commute, flash flooding possible in low-lying areas, exercise caution. He already had the traffic app running, its route glowing blue despite the weather warnings. An hour and 15 minutes until the interview. Plenty of time, even with the rain. He'd planned for this, checked 3 different weather forecasts the night before. The wipers beat a steady rhythm as he mentally rehearsed his opening introduction one more time. Mark Sullivan, senior systems architect, with 14 years of experience in educational technology integration. A semi-truck passed, throwing a sheet of water across his windshield. Mark tightened his grip on the steering wheel, remembering Claire's advice about Seattle rain. "It's not about driving fast," she'd always said. "It's about driving smart." She'd grown up here, knew every quirk of the local weather. The string of brake lights ahead proved her point. Someone had taken a curve too quickly, and now traffic was crawling. His phone recalculated, adding 12 minutes to the arrival time. Still manageable. He'd built in a buffer for exactly this kind of delay. Through the grey curtain of rain, downtown Seattle's skyline emerged, its towers looking more like watercolor paintings than solid structures. The traffic app suggested an alternate route, and Mark took it, following the familiar surface streets. Past the coffee shop where he and Claire had their first date. Past the park where Emily had learned to ride her bike. The city was a map of memories, each corner holding its own story. A new text message popped up on his phone's display. "Good luck, Daddy. The stars say you're going to be amazing." Emily must have convinced her teacher to let her send it. The simple message warmed him more than his travel mug of coffee ever could. The rain intensified, drumming against the roof of his car. Mark leaned forward slightly, squinting through the windshield. The road ahead curved gently, following the contour of the hill, and there, his headlights caught it first, hazard lights blinking weakly through the downpour. A sleek, black sedan was pulled halfway onto the shoulder, its front end angled awkwardly toward the guardrail. Steam or smoke rose from under its hood, dissipating in the rain. Mark checked his watch. 53 minutes until the interview. Traffic was light on this stretch, but the curve was dangerous in this weather. Someone could come around too fast, not see the stranded vehicle in time. He touched Emily's drawing through his jacket pocket. "What makes you special?" Her voice echoed in his memory. The answer wasn't about technical skills or years of experience. It was about who you were when no one was watching, when there was everything to lose and nothing to gain. Claire would have stopped. She wouldn't have even hesitated. Another check. Of the time, 51 minutes. The interview prep folder sat heavy in his briefcase, full of careful research and planned answers. All those nights of preparation, all those practice sessions, Emily's unwavering faith, it all came down to the next few minutes. Through the rain, he could see a figure moving around the stranded car, a woman in business attire, already soaked through, trying to make a call on her cell phone. She held the phone up, searching for a signal that the weather had probably knocked out. The traffic app chimed again. Heavy delays reported ahead. Consider alternate route. Mark's fingers tightened on the steering wheel. The responsible thing would be to keep driving. He had his own future to think about, his daughter's future. This was the most important interview of his career. The woman surely had roadside assistance, or someone else would stop. Someone with more time, fewer obligations, less at stake. Emily's voice came back to him. "Remember what Mommy always said about rainy days?" His turn signal clicked on before he'd consciously made the decision. As he carefully pulled onto the shoulder, the hazard lights of the stranded car pulsed through the rain like distant stars, watering an unseen garden. The emergency kit rattled in Mark's trunk as he pulled to a stop. Claire had insisted on assembling it herself. "Seattle weather doesn't mess around," she'd said, packing everything from flares to a thermal blanket. He teased her about being overprotective, but now, reaching for the umbrella she'd included, he sent up a silent thank you. Rain hammered against his suit jacket as he approached the stranded vehicle. The woman lowered her phone, turning to face him. Despite her dripping hair and rain-spattered blazer, she carried herself with unmistakable authority. "Having some car trouble?" Mark called out, trying to angle the umbrella to shield them both. "Engine just died." Her voice was clear and professional with a trace of frustration. "And apparently there's no cell service in this exact spot. There's a dead zone through this curve," Mark explained. "Something about the hill and the towers." He gestured to his car. "I've got a signal booster in my vehicle if you need to make a call." She studied him for a moment, weighing his offer. Her eyes were sharp and intelligent, taking in his business. "Attire. You're clearly on your way somewhere important." "It can wait." The words came automatically, though his stomach clenched at the lie. He glanced at her car. "Mind if I take a look? I'm no mechanic, but I've dealt with my share of car issues." She nodded, and Mark handed her the umbrella before popping the hood. Steam hissed into the rain as he examined the engine, careful to avoid the hot components. The problem was immediately apparent. A burst hose had sprayed coolant across the engine compartment. "Coolant leak," he reported, stepping back. "Not something we can fix here. You'll need a tow." "Perfect," she sighed, checking her watch. "I don't suppose you know any reliable towing services?" Mark returned to his car, retrieving his phone and the emergency kit. Claire's voice seemed to guide his hands as he dug through it, finding the small notebook where she'd written down emergency numbers. "Mike's Towing," he read. "They're local, family-owned. I've used them before." While he made the call, the woman attempted to salvage what she could from her car, retrieving a leather portfolio and a laptop bag. Mark couldn't help noticing the sleek, professional quality of everything she carried. This was someone used to operating at a high level. "They'll be here in about 40 minutes, he reported after hanging up. "Traffic's slowing them down?" She glanced at her watch again. "You really don't have to stay. I'm sure you have somewhere to be." Mark thought of the Blackwood Innovations office, waiting just a few miles away, of Emily's drawing and her unwavering faith, of all the preparation, all the hopes pinned on this morning. "Actually," he said, "I do have somewhere to be. But I also have a daughter who'd never forgive me if I left someone stranded in the rain." He offered a slight smile. "Besides, my wife helped enough stranded motorists in her time. It's only fair I carry on the tradition." Something in his tone must have conveyed the weight of that statement, because the woman's expression softened slightly. "She taught you well. She taught me everything important." Mark opened the emergency kit again, pulling out 2 packets of hand warmers. "These might help. The rain's not letting up." They stood under the umbrella, watching the traffic slide past in sheets of grey. Mark found himself sharing the story of how Claire had insisted on the emergency kit, how she'd updated it every season with religious dedication. The woman listened with genuine interest, asking thoughtful questions that kept the conversation flowing naturally. "She sounds like someone who believed in being prepared," she observed. She was. Mark smiled at a particular memory. "Our first. A date. She brought backup shoes in case her heels got uncomfortable. By the end of the night, half the other women at the restaurant had asked to borrow her flats." The woman laughed, a warm sound that cut through the dreary morning. A true pragmatist. "I like that." They fell into an easy conversation about Seattle's weather quirks and traffic patterns. Mark found himself impressed by her knowledge of the city's development and infrastructure. She spoke with the confidence of someone used to seeing the bigger picture, understanding how systems work together. When his phone buzzed with another weather alert, he barely noticed the time displayed. The interview slot was slipping away, minute by precious minute. But standing there in the rain, sharing stories with a stranger about the woman who had shaped his life, Mark felt an odd sense of peace. Some things were more important than interviews. Claire had taught him that too. The rain had thoroughly soaked through Mark's carefully pressed suit, turning the charcoal grey several shades darker. So much for making that polished first impression at Blackwood Innovations. He pushed the thought aside, focusing instead on holding the umbrella steady as another gust of wind swept across the highway. "You mentioned you work in technology," the woman asked, taking a sip from the emergency kit's backup water bottle. She'd introduced herself simply as Sarah, declining to share her last name or company, sensible given the circumstances. "System architecture," Mark nodded. "Primarily educational technology for the past 14 years. Sarah's eyebrows lifted slightly. "Educational technology, that's a fascinating field. What drew you to it?" The genuine interest in her voice encouraged him. "Initially, pure chance. I was doing corporate systems work when my daughter was born, and I started noticing gaps in early childhood learning software. The existing programs weren't adapting to different learning styles or engagement levels. So you decided to fix. It started small, just creating simple games to help my daughter learn. But it grew from there." Mark smiled, remembering Emily's delight at each new program. "Kids are the most honest user testers you'll ever find. They'll tell you exactly what works and what doesn't." Sarah leaned against her car, her professional demeanor softening. "Tell me more about these gaps you noticed. What specifically wasn't working?" The question sparked a passionate discussion. Mark found himself explaining his theories about adaptive learning systems, how technology could adjust, not just to skill levels, but to emotional states and attention spans. Sarah asked sharp, insightful questions that pushed him to elaborate, on points he'd never fully articulated before. "The real problem," he explained, gesturing with his free hand, "is that most educational software treats learning as a linear progression. But that's not how children actually learn. They leap forward in some areas while needing more time in others. The technology should flow with that natural pattern, not force it into rigid pathways? And how would you implement that flexibility without losing structural integrity? The question was precisely the kind of technical challenge he'd prepared for his interview. Mark outlined his ideas about dynamic learning matrices and real-time adaptation algorithms, watching Sarah's eyes light up with understanding. "That's quite innovative," she said when he finished. "Have you implemented any of these ideas?" "Some on a small scale. I developed a prototype for my daughter's school." He paused as a semi-truck roared past, throwing up a wall of spray. "The results were promising, but it needs more development, more resources." Sarah nodded thoughtfully. Resources are always the limiting factor in education technology. Finding the balance between innovation and accessibility. Exactly. It's not enough to create amazing technology if schools can't afford to implement it. This was another point he'd planned to make in his interview, and the words flowed easily. The real challenge is making sophisticated systems that can run on basic school infrastructure. Their conversation ranged across various aspects of educational technology: security concerns, accessibility requirements, the challenge of keeping children engaged while ensuring real learning took place. Sarah revealed an impressive knowledge of the industry, offering perspectives Mark hadn't considered. Time slipped by, marked only by the steady drum of rain and passing traffic. Mark barely noticed his soaking suit anymore, caught up in the most engaging technical discussion he'd had in months. There was something familiar about Sarah's way of thinking, her approach to problem-solving, but he couldn't quite place it. The tow truck's flashing lights finally appeared through the rain, pulling up behind them with practiced precision. The driver, a weathered man in his 60s, emerged with a clipboard. "Mike's towing," he announced unnecessarily. "Which one of you called?" "I did," Mark said, then turned to Sarah. "Will you be okay from here? I can stay if you need anything else." She smiled, a warm expression that transformed her professional features. "You've already done more than enough. Thank you, truly. Not many people would stop these days, let alone stay." The tow truck driver was already examining her car, making notes on his clipboard. "Looks like a straightforward tow. We'll have you sorted in no time." Mark checked his watch for the first time in nearly an hour, and his stomach dropped. His interview slot had come and gone. He'd missed his chance at Blackwood Innovations, but watching Sarah wrap his emergency blanket more tightly around her shoulders, seeing the genuine gratitude in her eyes, he couldn't bring himself to regret his choice. Some things were worth more than career opportunities. "Take care," he said, gathering his emergency kit, "and maybe keep some hand warmers in your car from now on." She laughed. "I think I'll be putting together an entire emergency kit. Your wife had the right idea." The mention of Claire brought a bittersweet smile to his face. She usually did. As Mark walked back to his car, the rain finally began to ease, as if the stars had finished watering their garden for the day. His soaked suit clung uncomfortably, and he could already imagine Emily's questions about why he was so wet. But he felt oddly lighter, as if he'd passed some test he hadn't known he was taking. The temporary visitor badge felt like a mockery. Mark Sullivan, interview candidate, 10:47 a.m., nearly 2 hours late. The lobby of Blackwood Innovations was everything he'd imagined, sleek, modern, with wall-mounted displays showcasing their educational software in action. Under different circumstances, he would have been fascinated by the interactive demonstrations. "I'm so sorry," he said again to the receptionist, water still dripping from his suit onto the polished concrete floor. "I know I've missed my slot, but if there's any chance..." "I'm afraid Ms. Torres, our HR director, had to move on to other appointments," the receptionist replied, though her tone was kind. She looked about Emily's age when she added, "Should I let her know you'd like to reschedule?" Mark's hand went to his pocket, touching Emily's drawing through the wet fabric. How could he explain this to her? That Daddy had missed his big chance. "Because Mark Sullivan?" The voice was familiar. He turned, his wet shoes squeaking slightly on the floor, and found himself facing Sarah. She'd changed into dry clothes, an impeccably tailored suit that spoke of authority, but her eyes, held the same warmth from their roadside conversation. Sarah, his mind struggled to reconcile the stranded motorist with this clearly senior executive. "You work here?" A small smile played at her lips. "You could say that." She extended her hand. "Sarah Blackwood. I don't believe we properly introduced ourselves earlier." The world seemed to tilt slightly. Mark's hand moved automatically to shake hers, his mind racing through their entire conversation by the highway. Every technical detail he'd shared, every passionate explanation about educational software. He'd been unknowingly interviewing with the CEO the whole time. He looked down at his dripping suit, then back at her composed figure. "I'm sorry. I missed the interview." "Missed it?" Sarah's smile widened. "Mr. Sullivan, you've been interviewing for the past hour and a half. In fact, it was one of the most impressive interviews I've conducted in years." The receptionist was watching their exchange with poorly concealed interest. Sarah turned to her. "Linda, could you have someone bring us some coffee in the corner meeting room and perhaps a towel for Mr. Sullivan?" "Right away, Ms. Blackwood." Sarah gestured toward a glass-walled meeting room with a view of the rain-washed city. "Shall we continue our discussion about adaptive learning matrices? I believe you were explaining how they could be implemented in under-resourced schools." Mark followed her, leaving small puddles in his wake, his mind still trying to process this turn of events. The meeting room was warm and bright, with comfortable chairs and a digital whiteboard spanning one wall. "Please sit," Sarah said, taking a seat herself. "And relax. You've already done the hard part." "The hard part?" "Showing me exactly who you are when you think no one's watching." She leaned forward slightly. "Do you know how many candidates I've interviewed who talk about caring for users? About making technology more human? But when given the choice between helping a stranger and advancing their career, most would drive right past." Linda arrived with coffee and a plush towel, which Mark accepted gratefully. As he dried his hair, Sarah continued, "I've read your resume, studied your portfolio. Your technical skills are exactly what we're looking for. But this morning, you showed me something far more valuable. You showed me your character." Outside the windows, the clouds were finally beginning to break, letting through rays of morning sunlight. Mark thought of Emily's drawing, still safe, in his pocket, of Claire's stars watering their garden, of all the twists and turns that had led him to this moment. "So," Sarah said, pulling out her tablet, "shall we discuss the details of your position as our new senior systems architect?" Sarah's CEO badge caught the morning light as she settled into her chair, the embossed Blackwood Innovations logo gleaming. She'd had countless opportunities to upgrade the simple design to something more elaborate, but she'd kept it identical to every other employee badge. It was one of many deliberate choices that defined her company's culture. "I should tell you how my morning actually started," she said, setting her coffee aside. "I deliberately took the longer route to the office today. I do it sometimes when I have important interviews scheduled. It helps me think." She smiled. "Though I hadn't planned on my car breaking down." Mark was still struggling to find his footing in this surreal situation. "You knew who I was? The whole time?" "Not at first. When you pulled over, I just saw a kind stranger in a suit, probably on his way to something important." She pulled up his resume on her tablet. "But then you mentioned educational technology and your passion for adaptive learning systems. Well, I'd spent the previous evening reviewing your application materials. The pieces fell into place." She turned the tablet to show him his own profile photo. "I could have introduced myself then, but you were so genuine, so engaged in our technical discussion. It was refreshing to have a conversation without the weight of titles and expectations." Mark thought back to their rain-soaked conversation. "Is that why you asked all those questions about implementation and resource constraints?" "Partly," Sarah admitted, "but mostly because your answers were fascinating. That idea about dynamic learning matrices responding to emotional cues. That's exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need here." She leaned forward. "Tell me, what would you do with that concept if you had real resources behind you?" The question sparked something in Mark. Despite his still damp suit, despite the lingering surreality of the situation, he found himself reaching for the digital whiteboard controls. "May I, please?" For the next 20 minutes, Mark outlined his vision, drawing diagrams and flowcharts, explaining how machine learning could help identify not just when students were struggling, but why. Sarah asked pointed questions that pushed his concepts further, suggesting connections he hadn't considered. The real breakthrough, he explained, sketching a new diagram, would be creating a system that adapts not just to academic performance, but to learning style shifts. Children don't learn the same way every day or even every hour. Their optimal learning style can change based on fatigue, emotional state, even the time of day. Sarah nodded, making notes. "Like how my daughter can't handle math first thing in the morning, but excels at it after lunch." Exactly. Traditional educational software treats students like static entities, but they're dynamic, constantly changing. If we could create systems that recognize and respond to those changes. He paused, suddenly self-conscious about his enthusiasm, but Sarah was smiling. "This is why you're perfect for this position. You understand the human side of technology." She set her tablet down. "That's what Blackwood Innovations was built on. When I started this company, everyone said educational software had to be either sophisticated or accessible. It couldn't be both. I refused to accept that limitation." She stood and walked to the window, looking out at the city below. "Every child deserves access to quality education. Every teacher deserves tools that actually help them teach. Technology should bridge gaps, not create them." Turning back to Mark, she added, "That's what I heard in our conversation by the highway. Someone who truly understands that mission." Mark thought of Emily, of her unwavering faith in him, of all the hours spent creating programs just to see her eyes light up with understanding. "It's not just a mission statement for me," he said quietly. "It's personal." "I know." Sarah returned to her seat. "That's why I'm not just offering you a job, Mr. Sullivan. I'm offering you a chance to make your vision reality. Full resources, complete creative control over the adaptive learning project, and a team to help you build it." She pulled out an envelope, somehow still crisp and dry despite the morning's adventures. "I was going to give you this after our scheduled interview, but I think you've more than earned it. Shall we discuss the details?" As Mark reached for the envelope, he felt Emily's drawing crinkle in his pocket. Somewhere, Claire's stars were surely twinkling with approval. The coffee cup between Mark's hands bore the Blackwood Innovations logo, a simple tree with circuit board patterns in its branches. They'd moved to the company's cafe, a bright space, with floor-to-ceiling windows where employees gathered at collaborative workstations. His suit was finally beginning to dry, though his tie remained slightly askew. "Tell me about your daughter," Sarah said, stirring honey into her tea. "She's clearly a driving force behind your work." Mark smiled, touching the drawing in his pocket. "Emily, she's 8. Too smart for her own good sometimes." He pulled out the slightly damp paper and carefully unfolded it. "She made this for Ray. My new office." Sarah examined the crayon drawing with genuine interest. "She already knew you'd get the job." "She never doubted it, even when I did." Mark traced the stick figure holding his daughter's hand. "After my wife passed, Emily became my whole world. Every program I've developed started with trying to help her learn, to make education feel like an adventure rather than a chore." "That's exactly the perspective we need here." Sarah gestured around the cafe. "Look at our teams. Notice anything?" Mark observed the groups scattered throughout the space. "They're diverse, different ages, backgrounds. More than that. See the woman in the red sweater? She was a kindergarten teacher for 20 years before becoming our UX designer. The man she's talking to? Special education coordinator turned software engineer. We actively recruit people who understand education. From the inside out, a burst of laughter drew their attention to a nearby table where a group was animatedly discussing something on a tablet. "That's our adaptive learning team," Sarah explained. They're working on a project to help dyslexic students, but they've hit some roadblocks. I think your ideas about emotional state recognition could be exactly what they need. The conversation flowed naturally from there, touching on technical challenges, team dynamics, and the company's broader mission. Mark found himself sharing stories about the programs he'd developed for Emily, the unexpected ways children interacted with technology, the lessons learned from each iteration. There was this one time, he said, warming to the subject, when Emily was struggling with fractions. I created this simple game where she had to feed different portions to hungry dragons, but she discovered that if she fed them in certain patterns, they would breathe different colored fire. Completely unintentional coding quirk, but suddenly she was calculating fractions just to create rainbow patterns. Sarah leaned forward, intrigued. And did you fix the quirk? No, I expanded on it, added more patterns, more colors, turned it into a reward system for accurate calculations. Sometimes the best features come from letting kids show you how they want to learn. That's brilliant, Sarah said. It's exactly the kind of thinking we encourage here. Technology shouldn't just teach, it should inspire curiosity, reward exploration. She pulled out her phone, showing him a photo of a young girl about Emily's age. This is my daughter, Sophie. She has ADHD, traditional educational. Software was a nightmare for her, too rigid, too linear. It's actually what inspired me to start Blackwood Innovations. I wanted to create tools that worked with different learning styles, not against them. Mark nodded, understanding deepening. That's why our conversation about adaptive matrices resonated with you, precisely. When you talked about technology, flowing with natural learning patterns, she smiled. Well, let's just say I wasn't acting when I showed interest. But tell me honestly, what did you think when you realized who I was? Honestly? Mark laughed softly. I thought about every good technical detail I'd shared by the highway, wondering if I'd said anything wrong. Then I realized that was probably the most honest interview I've ever had, precisely because I didn't know who you were. That's why I let the conversation play out naturally. Your passion for educational technology, your understanding of its real-world impact, none of that was rehearsed. It was genuine. She glanced at Emily's drawing again. Just like your decision to stop and help a stranger in the rain. Outside, the morning storm had fully cleared, leaving the sky a brilliant blue. Through the windows, Mark could see the city stretching out below, full of schools and students who could benefit from the kind of technology they'd been discussing. So, Sarah said, setting down her empty cup, are you ready to make Emily's drawing a reality, though I think we can offer a slightly better view than she imagined. The job offer letter sat before Mark on the polished conference table, its Blackwood Innovations letterhead crisp and professional. But it was the handwritten note at the bottom that caught his eye. Looking forward to seeing where your stars lead us, Sarah. The terms of the offer exceeded anything he'd dared to hope for. Beyond the generous salary and benefits package, there were details that showed Sarah had been paying close attention during their highway conversation. Leadership of the new adaptive learning division, resources for research and development, and flexibility for family obligations. I know single parenting comes with unique challenges, Sarah said, watching him read. We believe in supporting our employees' whole lives, not just their work hours. You'll have the freedom to structure your schedule around Emily's needs. Mark looked up from the letter, emotion catching in his throat. This is incredible. There's more. Sarah tapped a section near the bottom. We have a partnership with Emily's school district. Your daughter could be one of our first beta testers if she's interested. Though from what you've told me, she's already an experienced software tester. Mark laughed, remembering Emily's detailed critiques of his programs. She definitely doesn't hold back her opinions. Perfect. We need that kind of honest feedback. Sarah leaned forward. I meant what I said about your vision for adaptive learning systems. I want you to build it, Mark. Not just the technical framework, but the whole program. Build something that could help every child learn in their own way, at their own pace. The magnitude of the opportunity began to sink in. This wasn't just a job, it was a chance to make all his ideas reality, to create something that could genuinely help children like Emily, like Sarah's daughter Sophie. "I've been thinking about the emotional recognition algorithms," he said. "Ideas flowing freely now. If we combine machine learning with real-time feedback loops, we could create something that's not just responsive, but predictive. Something that could recognize when a student is about to hit a wall and adjust before frustration sets in." Sarah nodded encouragingly. "And how would you begin?" "Start small, but think big." Mark reached for a notepad, sketching quickly. Phase 1 would be basic pattern recognition, tracking how individual students interact with existing programs, identifying their peak learning periods and preferred methods. That gives us baseline data. And Phase 2, that's where it gets interesting. His pen moved faster, mapping out connections. We integrate emotional cues, mouse movement patterns, response timing, even facial expression recognition if parents opt in. The system learns each student's unique signals, their individual rhythms. Sarah studied his diagram. The personalization potential is enormous. Exactly. No more one-size-fits-all approaches. Each student gets a learning experience that actually adapts to them, not just their test scores. He paused, a new thought striking him. We could even include parent and teacher interfaces, letting them track patterns and progress in real time. "Making everyone part of the learning journey," Sarah added. "That's exactly the kind of holistic thinking we value here." Mark glanced at the offered salary again, still somewhat stunned by the figure. It meant stability, security. It meant being able to start Emily's college fund, maybe even look for a house in a better school district. "There's one more thing," Sarah said, pulling out another document. "This is our standard NDA, but I've added a special provision. Any educational software you've already developed for Emily remains your intellectual property, but we'd like first rights to integrate it into our platforms. With appropriate compensation, of course." Mark thought of all the programs sitting on his home computer, the countless hours of coding inspired by his daughter's learning journey. "They're rough prototypes. They're foundations we can build on," Sarah smiled. "Sometimes the best innovations start with a parent trying to help their child." She stood, extending her hand. "Welcome to Blackwood Innovations, Mark. I think this is the beginning of something extraordinary." As Mark shook her hand, he felt Emily's drawing crinkle in his pocket. He couldn't wait to tell her that the stars had been right all along, and that her next software testing job would be official. The first-day team photo captured a moment of genuine warmth. Mark surrounded by his new adaptive learning division, their faces bright with enthusiasm. They'd insisted on taking it in front of the wall-sized whiteboard, where he'd just finished outlining his vision, his diagrams and flowcharts still visible behind their smiling faces. The morning had started, with Emily insisting on walking him to his car. "You look like a boss, Daddy," she'd declared, straightening his tie with serious concentration. The pride in her eyes made his heart swell. Now, stepping into Blackwood Innovations as an employee rather than a candidate felt surreal. His new security badge worked smoothly at every door, each soft chime a reminder that this was real. Linda, the receptionist, greeted him with a knowing smile. "Ms. Blackwood asked me to give you this," she said, handing him a small package. Inside was a deluxe emergency car kit with a note, "For the next stranded motorist." Sarah, his new office, exceeded even Emily's crayon imagination. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Seattle, and the empty walls seemed to invite futures yet to be drawn. But it was the team gathering in his conference room that truly took his breath away. Sarah had assembled a group that perfectly balanced technical expertise with educational experience. Dr. Maria Chen, former special education coordinator, now a leading developer in educational software. James Murphy, who'd taught high school math for 15 years before becoming a UX designer. Dr. Rajesh Patel, whose doctoral thesis on machine learning in educational contexts had won international awards. "We've all read your proposals," Maria said during introductions. "Your ideas about emotional state recognition in learning patterns? That's exactly what we've been missing in our dyslexia support program." The morning flew by in a whirlwind of presentations and discussions. Mark found himself drawing on the whiteboard, expanding on his highway conversation with Sarah. His team didn't just follow his ideas, they enhanced them, offering perspectives he hadn't considered. "What if we incorporated music theory?" suggested Lisa Torres, their audio engineer who'd once taught elementary school music. "Different learning states might respond to different rhythms, tempos, and link it with color theory," James added, already sketching on his tablet. "Create a full, sensory-adaptive environment." By lunchtime, the whiteboard was covered in possibilities. Sarah stopped by just as they were ordering food, taking in the scene with evident satisfaction. "I see you're all getting along," she observed, studying the complex diagrams. "Though I hope someone's documenting all this." "Already on it," Rajesh replied, holding up his tablet. "We're setting up a shared workspace now. Mark's system architecture is revolutionary. It'll change how we approach everything." Mark felt a flush of pride, but also humility. It's everyone's input that's making it work. "I never considered the musical element or the color theory applications." "That's why you're here," Sarah said. "Not just to implement your ideas, but to help different perspectives come together." Speaking of which, she held up her phone. "Time for the traditional first-day team photo. Everyone gather round." They assembled in front of the whiteboard, this diverse group of educators turned technologists who shared his passion for transforming education. As the phone's camera timer counted down, Mark felt a profound sense of belonging. The photo captured more than just smiles. It captured possibility. These were people who understood that technology wasn't just about algorithms and code. It was about the child struggling with fractions, the teacher trying to reach 20 different learning styles at once, the parent staying up late to help with homework. Back in his office after lunch, Mark took out Emily's drawing and pinned it to his wall, the first decoration in the space. Next to it, he placed the new team photo. The crayon stars in Emily's picture seemed to smile down at the real people who would help make their vision reality. His phone buzzed with a text from Emily. "How's your first day as a boss, Daddy? Did you ace it?" Looking at his newly assembled team through the office window, still energetically discussing morning ideas, Mark smiled and typed back, "The stars were right, sweetheart. They were absolutely right." The project proposal sat open on Mark's dual monitors, its cursor blinking at the end of a complex paragraph about neural network implementation. 2 weeks into his role, and he was already pushing against the boundaries of conventional educational software design. The working title at the top of the document read, "Project Constellation, Adaptive Learning Through Emotional Intelligence." "Daddy, your equations are wrong." Mark glanced down at Emily, who had set up her own little workstation in his office. It was his week to have her after school, and Blackwood's family-friendly policies meant she could do her homework while he worked late. She was pointing at his tablet, where he'd been sketching algorithm patterns. "Wrong? How so?" "The pattern's not balanced." She traced the flowchart with her finger. "See? If you want it to make a star shape like you said, both sides need to be equal." Mark stared at the diagram. She was right. His pattern recognition algorithm had a subtle asymmetry that could cause bias in the results. Leave it to his daughter to spot the flaw in his geometry. A knock at his office door revealed Maria holding a stack of user testing reports. "Got a minute? We've hit a snag with the dyslexia module." "Come in." Mark waved her toward the conference table. "Emily, want to show Dr. Chen what you just found?" Emily proudly explained the pattern imbalance, while Maria listened intently, her expression shifting from polite attention to genuine interest. "You know," Maria said, "this could help with our current problem." She spread out her reports. We've been trying to create balanced testing patterns for dyslexic students, but our sequences keep favoring certain learning styles over others. Mark rolled his chair over to the table, Emily following with her homework forgotten. Show me. The reports detailed how their initial adaptive algorithms were working well for some students, but missing others entirely. The patterns were too rigid, too predictable. What if, Emily piped up, it was more like a game, like when Daddy made the dragon colors change with fractions? Maria's eyes lit up. The rainbow patterns. Mark, you mentioned those in your first interview with Sarah. Could we apply that principle here? Mark was already reaching for his tablet, sketching a new flowchart. Instead of linear progression, we create constellation patterns. Each learning achievement becomes a point of light, connecting to form larger patterns. And the patterns themselves become rewards, Maria finished. The more balanced the learning, the more complete the constellation. They worked late into the evening, Emily contributing ideas with the unfiltered creativity of childhood. By the time Mark saved the final draft of the proposal, it had evolved into something far beyond his original concept. The next morning, he presented it to Sarah and the board of directors. The conference room was intimidating, but he drew confidence from Emily's star-shaped sticky note secretly pressed to the back of his tablet. The key innovation isn't just in the adaptive algorithms, he explained, displaying the complex but elegant flowcharts. It's in how we visualize progress. Each student's learning journey creates unique constellation patterns, beautiful in their own right, but also deeply informative about their learning style. He demonstrated the prototype interface, showing how different learning patterns created different stellar formations. Traditional educational software tries to force every student down the same path, but real learning is more like stargazing. Everyone sees different patterns, makes different connections. Our software should honor that individuality while quietly guiding students toward complete understanding. The board members leaned forward, engaged. Sarah's smile grew as Mark outlined implementation strategies, resource requirements, and potential impact across different educational sectors. The best part, he concluded, is that it's endlessly extensible. We can add new subject areas, new pattern recognition modules, new reward systems, all while maintaining the core adaptive intelligence. After the presentation, Sarah pulled him aside. That was impressive, though I suspect you had some help from our youngest consultant, Mark laughed. Emily found a critical flaw in my original design. It reminded me why we're doing this. Children see patterns we adults sometimes miss. Speaking of patterns, Sarah said, I notice this proposal builds on ideas you first shared in the rain by my broken-down car. You've come a long way in 2 weeks. Looking at the project proposal, now approved and ready for full development, Mark thought about all the twists of fate that had led him here. Sometimes the most important patterns were the ones you only recognized in retrospect. We all have somewhere to be, he quoted Sarah's words from that rainy morning. Sometimes we just need a little help finding our way there. Mark's first quarterly performance review read like a success story. Sarah had been thorough in her evaluation, filling the document with specific examples of his impact. Project Constellation has revolutionized our approach to adaptive learning. Leadership style fosters innovation while maintaining focus. Exceptional ability to bridge technical and educational perspectives. But it was the personal note at the end that meant the most. You've created something remarkable here, Mark. Not just the technology, but the culture of compassionate innovation. Every stranded motorist should be so lucky. 3 months had transformed his initial ideas into working prototypes. The dyslexia module, first to launch, was already showing promising results in pilot programs. Teachers reported unprecedented engagement levels, while student feedback forms were filled with comments about the star patterns they'd created. The constellation rewards are genius, James told him during their morning stand-up meeting. I had a third grader refuse to leave the computer lab yesterday because she was one achievement away from completing Ursa Major. Maria nodded enthusiastically, and parents are noticing too. We're getting emails about children practicing reading at home voluntarily just to unlock new patterns. The team had grown, adding specialists in different learning challenges. Each brought new perspectives to the project, expanding its scope while maintaining the core vision of adaptive, emotionally intelligent learning. Emily had become an unofficial team mascot, her after-school presence in Mark's office a regular occurrence. Her homework station had evolved into a proper desk, complete with a junior developer nameplate that the team had given her for her 9th birthday. "Mr. Sullivan?" Linda's voice came through the intercom. "The educational board representatives are here for the demonstration." Mark gathered his materials, touching Emily's drawing for luck, now framed on his wall alongside a growing collection of team achievements. The conference room was packed with educators, administrators, and a few faces he recognized from national education technology forums. "Thank you all for coming," he began, launching the presentation he'd practiced with Emily the night before. "What you're about to see isn't just another educational software platform. It's a new way of thinking about how technology can adapt to human needs rather than forcing humans to adapt to technology." The demonstration flowed smoothly, each feature highlighting the system's ability to recognize and respond to individual learning patterns. Mark showed how the software adjusted its approach based on subtle cues, response times, mouse movements, pattern choices, building a unique learning profile for each student. "The breakthrough," he explained, pulling up a series of constellation patterns, "is that we're not just tracking academic progress, we're creating an emotional engagement map, a visual representation of each student's learning journey." The room grew animated as educators recognized the implications. Questions flew. Could it adapt to different age groups? What about students with multiple learning challenges? How soon could they implement it? Sarah, watching from the back of the room, caught his eye and nodded approvingly. She'd seen something in him that rainy morning, some potential that went beyond technical skills or interview preparation. Now, watching him field complex questions with confident expertise, her faith was justified. After the presentation, an elderly school superintendent pulled him aside. "You know," she said, her eyes bright with unshed tears, "I've been in education for 40 years. This is the first time I've seen technology that truly understands how children learn. If we'd had this when my grandson was struggling with dyslexia..." Mark thought of Emily, of all the late nights coding solutions for her challenges, of Claire's patient guidance that had shaped his understanding of how to nurture learning, of Sarah's vision for technology that served humanity. "We're just getting started," he told the superintendent. "Every child deserves to see their own constellation." Back in his office, he found a sticky note from Emily on his monitor. "Did you ace it, Daddy?" "The stars told me you did." The performance review on his desk confirmed it. He had indeed aced it, but more importantly, he'd found his true path. Not just a job, but a mission. Not just success, but significance. The rain had cleared long ago, but somewhere Claire's stars were still tending their garden, and it was blooming beyond anyone's expectations. The thank you card sat propped on Sarah's desk, its handmade cover decorated with carefully drawn stars and constellations. Inside, in Emily's improving penmanship, was a message that brought tears to Sarah's eyes whenever she read it. "Thank you for saving Daddy's smile. Now he helps other kids smile too. Love, Emily." 1 year had transformed both father and daughter. Mark sat in Sarah's office now, reviewing the latest project constellation metrics, while Emily attended her after-school coding class, a program Blackwood Innovations had started for employees' children. "These adoption rates are extraordinary," Sarah said, scrolling through the data. "Over 2,000 schools nationwide, and the feedback keeps getting better." "The team deserves the credit," Mark replied. "Everyone brought something unique to the project." The team you built, Sarah reminded him. Speaking of which, how's Emily enjoying her first real coding projects? Mark's face lit up with pride. She's already talking about improvements for the constellation patterns. Apparently, we need more variety for mathematics achievements. She says the current ones are too predictable. Sarah laughed. Like father, like daughter, though I seem to remember someone else pointing out pattern flaws on their first day. The year had been a whirlwind of development, testing, and implementation. Project Constellation had evolved from a promising prototype into a comprehensive learning platform. Schools reported significant improvements in student engagement and achievement, particularly among children with learning differences. But the numbers told only part of the story. Mark's inbox was filled with emails from parents and teachers, sharing personal victories. The dyslexic student who finally found joy in reading. The math-anxious child who discovered patterns that made sense. The autistic learner who connected with the material in their own unique way. "Remember what you told me that first morning?" Sarah asked, about technology flowing with natural, learning patterns instead of forcing children into rigid pathways? Mark nodded, thinking back to their rain-soaked conversation by her broken-down car. "You've done more than prove that concept," she continued. "You've created a whole new paradigm for educational technology. The industry is following our lead now." It was true. Competitors were scrambling to develop their own adaptive learning systems, but they missed the crucial element that made Project Constellation special: the human touch, the understanding that technology should serve the heart as well as the mind. "We've had acquisition offers," Sarah revealed. "Substantial ones, but that's not why we're here, is it?" "No," Mark agreed. "We're here because every child deserves to see their own stars." A commotion outside the office drew their attention. The coding class had finished, and Emily was showing her latest project to Maria and James. She'd created a new constellation pattern that changed colors based on problem-solving approaches, not just right or wrong answers, but the thinking process itself. 9 years old and already innovating, Sarah mused. "You know, we should start an internship program for the next generation. Let them show us what we're missing." The idea sparked something in Mark. "Actually, I've been thinking about expanding our parent involvement modules. What if we created a family coding initiative? Help parents and children learn together, build their own educational tools, like you and Emily did?" "Exactly. Every parent has insights into how their child learns best. If we could harness that knowledge, combine it with our adaptive systems." Sarah was already taking notes. "Draft a proposal. We'll make it our next major project." Later that evening, as Mark and Emily drove home, she asked about the card she'd given Sarah. Did she like it? "She loved it, sweetheart. It's still on her desk." Emily beamed. The stars were right about her too, weren't they? They knew she'd help us. Mark thought about all the ways his life had changed in 1 year. The morning that had started with a broken-down car had led to broken barriers, new possibilities, and a future brighter than he'd dared to hope. "Yes," he said, reaching over to squeeze her hand. The stars definitely knew what they were doing. The house keys felt weighty in Mark's palm, their brass surface still untarnished by use. The real estate agent had tied a blue ribbon around them, adding a festive touch to this moment of triumph. Standing in the empty living room of their new home, Mark watched Emily twirl in the sunlight streaming through the bay windows. "My room has a window seat, Daddy, just like in the books." She rushed to the window, already planning her reading nook. "Can we paint it blue, like the sky?" "We can paint it any color you want, sweetheart." Mark smiled, remembering her crayon drawing of his office from a year ago. She'd known even then that things would get better. The house was everything they'd dreamed of. A craftsman-style 3-bedroom in a quiet neighborhood with excellent schools. More importantly, it was only 15 minutes from Blackwood Innovations, meaning more time together and less time commuting. "Ms. Chen said her daughter goes to the new school too," Emily chatted excitedly, referring to Maria's child. "And Sophie. Can Sophie come over when we're all moved in?" Sophie was Sarah's daughter, who had become fast friends with Emily through the company's after-school programs. Their shared experiences as children who learned differently had created a special bond. Of course she can. We'll have plenty of room for study sessions and sleepovers now. Mark walked through to the kitchen, where morning light played across granite countertops. No more cramped apartment meals. They could actually cook together here. His phone buzzed with a text from Sarah. "Heard you got the keys today. Congratulations." Emily's coding club presentation inspired the board to fast-track the family initiative program. "Can we discuss next week?" The presentation Sarah referenced had been Emily's idea, showing other parents how she and Mark had developed educational games together. Her natural enthusiasm and first-hand experience had convinced even the most skeptical board members that parent-child collaboration could revolutionize educational software development. "Daddy, come see!" Emily's voice echoed from upstairs. "There's a perfect spot for Mommy's star map." Mark climbed the stairs, finding Emily in the master bedroom. She was right. The wall opposite the windows seemed designed for Claire's framed constellation map, the one she'd used to teach Emily about the stars. "She would have loved this house," Emily said softly, slipping her hand into his. "She would have," Mark agreed, pulling her close. "And she would be so proud of you, sweetheart. Your coding projects, your straight A's, how you help other kids with the constellation patterns. And she'd be proud of you too," Emily added, "because you're helping all the kids now, not just me." The morning sun caught the house keys in Mark's hand, sending little reflections dancing across the walls like stars. So much had changed since that rainy morning when he'd chosen to help a stranded motorist. The promotion last month to Director of Educational Innovation. Emily's growing confidence both in school and in the coding club. The friends they'd made at Blackwood, who had become like extended family. Their old apartment had served its purpose, sheltering them through difficult times. But this house represented something more. A foundation for their future, a space to grow, a place to build new memories while honoring old ones. "Can we get a dog now?" Emily asked, breaking into his reverie. Sarah said Sophie's getting a puppy, and there's that big backyard. Mark laughed. "Let's get moved in first, then we can talk about dogs." They spent the rest of the morning planning which furniture would go where, what colors to paint each room, where to plant the garden Emily wanted to start. Each decision felt like placing another star in their own private constellation, creating patterns of possibility. By the time they left, the empty house didn't feel empty anymore. It was filled with plans and promises, hopes and dreams. The keys in Mark's pocket were more than just metal now. They were a tangible reminder that sometimes the best things in life came from unexpected detours, from choosing kindness over convenience, from believing in the guidance of unseen stars. The Blackwood Innovations newsletter featured a full-page spread about the new single-parent technology initiative. From chance encounter to changing lives, how one rainy morning inspired a revolutionary program. The article detailed how Mark Sullivan's own experience had led to a comprehensive support system for single parents in tech, complete with flexible work arrangements, childcare support, and specialized training programs. "Sometimes the most qualified candidates are the ones life has tested the most," Mark explained in the featured interview. "They've developed problem-solving skills you can't learn in any classroom." The initiative had started small, just an idea shared during a leadership meeting. But Sarah had immediately seen the potential, just as she'd seen something special in Mark that rainy morning 2 years ago. "Remember when you said my car breaking down was the best interview you'd ever conducted?" she reminded him, reviewing the program's latest success metrics. "We're replicating that authenticity, letting people show their true capabilities without artificial constraints." The numbers were impressive. 30 single parents hired across different departments, their children thriving in the after-school programs, their innovative perspectives already enhancing various projects. But the real impact showed in the smaller moments. The grateful emails, the transformed lives, the children proud of their parents' achievements. Lisa Martinez, one of the first program participants, had gone from struggling freelance web designer to lead UX developer in just 18 months. Her daughter's reading challenges had actually informed several crucial improvements to Project Constellation's interface. The difference, Lisa told the newsletter, is that Blackwood doesn't just accommodate our family responsibilities. They value the insights those responsibilities give us. My daughter's learning journey makes me a better designer. The program had caught the attention of the tech industry at large. Other companies were starting to implement similar initiatives, though few matched Blackwood's comprehensive approach. Mark had insisted on including full educational support for participants' children, remembering his own worries about Emily's future. The stars aligned for us, he often told the program participants, but we shouldn't leave success to chance. Every parent deserves the opportunity to build a better future for their children. Emily, now 10, had appointed herself unofficial welcome ambassador for newcomers' children. She ran a weekly Kids Who Code club, teaching other children the basics of programming through constellation-based games. My dad helped me learn by making it fun, she explained to a new group. Now, we help other kids do the same thing. That's what Mommy's stars would want. The newsletter photo showed Mark with the latest group of program participants, all sharing stories of their own challenging journeys. Among them was a single father who'd stopped to help someone change a tire on his way to the interview, exactly the kind of character-revealing moment that the program was designed to recognize. Sarah joined the group's regular Friday afternoon meeting, where participants shared their week's challenges and victories. 2 years ago, she told them, a stranded CEO and a late interview candidate had a conversation in the rain. We didn't realize it then, but we were creating a template for how technology companies could operate with more humanity. The meeting room walls displayed children's artwork alongside technical diagrams, a visual reminder of why they were all there. Mark's eye caught Emily's original crayon drawing, now framed alongside dozens of others. Each one represented a parent's dream, a child's faith, a future taking shape. The real innovation, he told the group, isn't in our software or systems. It's in recognizing that our responsibilities to our children don't make us less valuable employees. They make us more empathetic innovators. As the meeting wound down, Mark received an email from a top tech magazine wanting to feature the initiative in their next issue. How did you know it would work? They asked. Looking around at the transformed lives, the growing community, the children proudly showing their parents their latest coding projects, Mark thought back to that crucial moment of choice on a rain-soaked highway. We knew, he wrote back, because we believed in the stars. The new family photo sat framed on Mark's desk, taken at Emily's recent school science fair. They were both beaming at the camera, standing in front of her project, Emotional Pattern Recognition in Educational Software Development. The first place ribbon caught the light, but it was their genuine happiness that made the picture special. 2 years had passed since that rainy morning when fate had tested his character. The memory felt distant now, like stars glimpsed through clouds, but its impact continued to shape their lives in unexpected ways. Dad! Sophie's team figured out the new constellation pattern. Emily burst into his office, tablet in hand. She was nearly 11 now, her red hair pulled back in a practical ponytail as she led her own coding team in the after-school program. Show me, Mark said, clearing space on his desk. The display showed an elegant new achievement pattern, a complex series of interconnected stars that revealed different images depending on the learning path taken. It adapts to each student's problem-solving style, Emily explained proudly. Just like you taught us. Sarah appeared in the doorway, smiling at the scene. I see the next generation of innovators is hard at work, ready for the anniversary celebration. The company had gathered in the main conference room, now transformed with twinkling lights that mimicked constellations. Project Constellation. had evolved beyond anyone's expectations, reaching schools worldwide. But today's celebration wasn't about software or success metrics. It was about community. The room was filled with families from the single-parent technology initiative, their children demonstrating their latest coding projects. Lisa Martinez's daughter was explaining her reading progress to a group of impressed educators. James Murphy's son was showing off a math game he'd designed himself. Hard to believe it all started with a broken-down car, Sarah mused, watching the interactions. Though I suspect the stars had a plan that morning. Mark touched the frame of Claire's constellation map, now hanging prominently in the conference room. They usually do. Emily had joined Sophie and the other children, their excited chatter mixing with the adults' conversations. The room hummed with the energy of possibilities being born, of futures taking shape. "You know," Sarah said, "when I first started Blackwood Innovations, people said you couldn't build a successful tech company on emotional intelligence and human connection. That efficiency would always trump empathy. And now? Now they're all trying to copy our model, but they miss the essential truth. It's not about the programs or policies. It's about believing in people, especially when they're standing in the rain." Mark watched Emily demonstrate a coding concept to a younger child. Her patience and enthusiasm mirror images of his own teaching style. She caught his eye and waved, her smile brightening the room like a newfound star. The photo on his desk captured more than just a moment of success. It captured a journey of faith, resilience, and the extraordinary power of ordinary kindness. Every day, new families joined their expanding constellation, each bringing their own light to the pattern. "The stars were right," Emily had written on the back of the photo. "They're always right when you trust them." Mark couldn't argue with that wisdom. After all, every important moment in his life, meeting Claire, Emily's birth, that fateful, rainy morning, had felt guided by something greater than chance. As the celebration continued around him, Mark thought of all the future moments waiting to unfold, all the lives yet to be touched, all the constellations yet to be discovered. Some stars you could see clearly,